I'm not going to stand for that. And she just had a spell over that. There's just some things that she didn't like, and she said it about it, but I didn't ever say a thing. In all the years Herman worked for Dad, I never once asked him for a penny of money. Sometimes I didn't even have a postage stamp to write to my dad, and I think there's only about 4 cents or 3 or 4 cents a letter then. But that's all in the past. But you folks, some of you think you're bad off when you don't have a new TV or a new car or some of the things that you'd like right now. But we didn't have a car. We didn't have hardly anything. But we had happiness, and we had the family, the children, and we wanted every one of them. But anyway, Gail's first birthday had a little party. Elva and her little kids came over. Jim was, at that time, was selling General Electric appliances. We knew the electricity was going to come in for too long, and so they started selling electric appliances to us so that when the electricity came, we'd have electric irons and toasters and whatever people would afford, you know. And Jim had an agency with the General Electric to sell their appliances, and so he was working this area over here, and quite often he'd bring his family over and leave them to my place, and then he would go sell all day long and then come pick them back up at night. And so it happened that on Gail's birthday he brought the kids over, and I made a birthday cake, and he had a picture taken of him and the birthday cake, with the birthday cake out on our front porch, that little house down in the lane that we had, and he's sitting straight out with his little legs there, and this big round layer cake right in the front. And I told Elva, I said, let's just set it there in front of him and see what he'll do. He looked at it for quite a while, and then he just grabbed in the middle of it, just squeezed in it. We just let him crumble it all up and play in it for quite a while, and then we finally cut it. And Melvin and Arlene was both older than he was, and of course Night and Island's little children, Devon and Arden, they came and had some birthday cake, and I think we had some ice cream with it or something. We'd saved up pretty much to get a little something for a birthday. I think Gail got a little taste of the yellow cake, not much of the icing. But that was a cute little picture. I believe that's in his baby book. I'm not sure. And I kind of believe that Elva or Nida, one of them, took the little picture and gave to me. But it's kind of a cute little thing. He kind of thought he'd look up at you and grin so cute, and that's the way he's doing on this little picture. And Herman and I were so pleased when he was a boy. I think Herman was just simply delighted. He liked Olene and thought she was dainty and cute, but you know, every man wants a son. And he thought his cup runned over when we got Gail. We thought, well, now we know we can have boys and girls, and that was really a joy. We was really happy for Gail. And when his hair started to come in, he wasn't always scroungy, because when his hair started to come in, and when he could walk and step and do the things, and he liked to show off and do things, and he learned quite fast. He didn't talk young. Olene talked a lot younger than Gail. Gail was quite slow at talking, but I think he got his teeth about the same time Olene did, about a year old. If I had the baby books and that, I could tell you about, because I kept track of those things. You could look back on your baby books if you'd kept them and you could see little clips of your hair and traces of your hands, and the things that I did keep, and the little record of your health record and your weights and measures and things that I kept. I got worse as the years went on, as my other responsibilities piled up. I know I did a lot better job with Olene because I just had her alone, and you know, didn't have much to do, and I could spend more time with her, and I could spend more time working on her book. And then Aunt Isabel was the one that sent the pretty pink taffeta baby book to her, and the others were just little books that, I think I got one in the shower and picked up one somewhere else, and they weren't very choice, and some that they gave you at the hospital that I kept records in, and it just got worse as the years went by. So some of your baby books didn't amount to too much, but most of your informations are in them. And I tried to get a collection of your pictures as much as I could, but we didn't have film. We couldn't get film all during the war, and after it for quite a while the film was frozen for the service and that, and we couldn't buy film, so we didn't have access to film to take pictures of our children, and that made me feel bad. And we couldn't afford really to go to a studio and have their pictures taken every once in a while like they do now, but I'd love to have had that done. Gail had a few little accidents when he was big enough to run around a little bit, but not big enough to no danger. And while I'd be washing dishes or doing something with the other baby with Garry or something, and he was playing, one time when he wasn't very big, he picked up a little cedar stick and was running with it and tripped over the rocker on the rocking chair and fell, and it broke off in his face. Right a ways down on his cheek under his eye. And I got the slivers most out, I thought, but it didn't heal, and it didn't heal, and I poulticed it, and I did everything to it, and I put methylate and everything I could think of on it, and it still wouldn't heal. And I decided there was some more sliver in it. And so I got his little face, I got him between my legs, kind of holding him, and looked his little face up, and I'd work and get a little piece of that off. It just broke off clear along flat. And, you know, for about a month I was getting little slivers out of that. And it didn't heal. I knew there was still more slivers in it. It just broke right off flat in his face. And I bet he's still got a little scar there if he looked close. And I think it's under his left eye, the way I remember. And he would just sit there and let me pinch that up and squeeze it. I squeezed a little bit, and finally quite a big piece popped out. And after that it healed, and I guess that was the last of those cedar slivers. The doctor told me, he said it was a good thing it was cedar instead of pine. Broke off in there, because he said cedar would heal so much better. And another time he was kind of running around, he had a little toy trumpet. And it had a little wooden thing over the end of it at first, and that came off somehow, and it was just metal on that end, and I'd kind of taken it away from the kids, but sometimes they'd get things back again. And he had that in his mouth running, and he stumbled. No, he ran and hit the frame on the door with the front of that little, he didn't turn enough to get through the doorway, and the front of that hit the casing on the door, and it just went in there, and it cut his palate, and one of his tonsils just grazed in there. And I don't know, it was bleeding down his throat, but I didn't know what else to do but just kind of let it get better. I didn't know what the doctor could do. When it kind of stopped bleeding and I could see that it had cut it, blood came out of his mouth, and it was all a little bloody around his mouth, or it had cut, and he cried quite a while. I just rocked him good. I used to rock my babies a lot and pet them. They were so sweet. I think I said that Gail had the measles right along the same time that Garry and Olene, not the measles, but the chicken pox at the same time, and he was the one that got the worst of it. Garry had one pox, a big one, and Olene had, quite a few, but Gail, you were just simply covered with chicken pox, and it was so miserable. Whenever you go to the bathroom, you just cry. It smarted, you know, if you got the least little bit of urine on you, while you would just cry. And I just was so glad when those chicken pox healed. I used to put I guess it was Vaseline and things on them and everything to try to make it so they was more comfortable. But you had a hard time with chicken pox, and then you had a hard time with measles too. I made Gail lots of cute little suits of clothes, cute little shirts to go with them, and little pants that had straps that go up over. And some of his little clothes was made over out of other material, but most of them was little new material, especially the summer ones. He and Garry, and they looked real cute in their little clothes. And he'd have little sandals and little short anklets in the summertime, and long stockings in the wintertime. And then when he wasn't very big, I made him a little pink snowsuit, and it was out of a pink wool bathrobe that I had. I never did wear it much, and I made this out of and it was quite a heavy wool, and it made up the cutest little snowsuit, the little pants and little leggings, you know, and then the little coat with the little cap like a little elf fastened on, and he looked so cute in that. And I kept that. Garry wore that a little bit, and then I had that when I think when Lyle was a baby. I think Lyle finished wearing that out up to Ogden, and Dad bought you kids snowsuits up there. When Olene was about 5, she was having quite a lot of trouble every once in a while with tonsillitis, and she'd get really sick and feverish, and that was the times when she was ornery about taking the aspirin and wouldn't take it for me, but she'd take it for Nida. We'd give her aspirin for sore throat. Well, Dr. Herman was here by then, and we took you kids to the well baby clinics every so often, and he looked at her throat and said her tonsils would need to come out, and so he was going to do some tonsillectomies there in town, and he set up a date. He was doing them up to Leon Jolly's place. She was the postmistress at the time. And oh, her hair was so cute then. She had the long curls, and I got her a cute little new pair of pajamas she just looked adorable in, and had her hair with little ribbons and everything. And he said to have them bring them in pajamas because they'd put them right to bed when they got through. And he had taken Arlene's out though quite a while before, and he'd given her a dime, and Olene knew that, and that was the thing she wanted more than anything on earth, was for Dr. Herman to give her a dime. She didn't care if he cut her all to pieces when he took her tonsils out. That didn't worry her one bit, but she worried would Dr. Herman give her a dime too. Now I know kids didn't have much money in those days. They got a penny now and then for a sucker and all, and you know, a little more than that sometimes, but a dime, she thought a dime would be quite a lot, and I guess in those days when Herman was working for $1 a day, a dime was quite a little bit. But anyway, I told him about it, and I saved a dime, and I slipped it to him, and I said, whatever you do when she comes to, you give her this dime. I told him about it while she was off. Well, it scared me nearly to death. I'd never seen a kid have a tonsillectomy. But she looked so darlingly on the table, and he started to give her the ether, and he said, oh, mine. He said, my. Then he says, profaned, he said, Olene, I hate to do this. He says, you are so sweet. I hate to do this to you. You're going to hate Dr. Herman. And I said, not if you give her the dime. And he said, yes, she will. The kids all hate me afterwards when I say, do you like me? Why, they'll all say no. So she had her tonsils out, and when she was coming through, and just a little bit, why, he gave her the dime, and he said, you know what's in your hand? And she would swear she didn't know what it was. He says, haven't you seen one of those before? She'd never seen one. Well, she had, but she was so embarrassed. She was so tickled and overcome by it, I guess, and embarrassed she had to acknowledge it. And I said, what do you tell Dr. Herman for the dime? And she said, thank you. And then he said, but I bet you hate Dr. Dr. Herman for making your throat sore. She says, I love you, Dr. Herman. And he said, oh, I could just cry now. He says, I feel more ashamed than ever for, for hurting a little child like this. He says, she's so sweet and innocent. But she got along just fine, and Dad Pollock came to see her, and he brought her some marshmallows. Now, that was unusual for him to do anything like that for one of my kids. About the only time I remember of him doing something special for one of them. But he brought her a little sack of marshmallows after she was getting a little bit better, because he thought maybe she could eat a marshmallow. Since we're talking about tonsils, well, Gail and Garry both seem to be having quite trouble with tonsils, and Garry I knew was, and he had to start to school. I wanted their tonsils out before they started to school, and I knew Garry had to have his out. He wasn't starting to school that year, but I think Gail was, and I kind of thought, doctor said Gail's tonsils didn't look really infected, but he thought he'd just do better if I had his tonsils out. So we had him and Garry both had their tonsils out up to Ogden, and I can't remember the doctor, whether it was Dr. Strandquist or what his name was, but it seemed like it was. and I had to go downtown for something, and I left the kids with Olene. She was then about 7 or 8, 6 or 7, 7 or 8, and I told her I'd left the lunch dishes. I had to catch the streetcar and go down and right back. I had to get something real bad that we had to have for the next day to take to the hospital. And I said, and then Mom will come back and bathe the kids and get them ready because we have to go early in the morning. And when I got back, that little thing had the dishes washed, the kitchen floor all swept, and she had put both of those little kids in the tub and bathed them and washed their hair and had them all in their pajamas and to bed. When I got back, that streetcar took forever to go down. It was during the war, and the only way we had to go to town, and it stopped on every place. People rode it, that's all there was. And it didn't just go zuzzing along and pick up a person now and then. They just didn't only go about a block, and then you'd have to stop and let a lot get off and a lot get on, and people coming home from work, and it was kind of early in the evening. It was summer, and it was early, but the kids had quite a hard time with their tonsils. Gail, especially, when his bout got healed, they was playing out on the porch with some little soldiers their dad had got 'em. It was during the war, and all the toys was war things, soldiers and tanks and guns and things, and he got 'em a little set, and they liked that, and we had a screened-in porch at the back, and they liked to play out there at that set, and he was playing out there. And somehow he came in and got a graham cracker, and I guess it was too rough for his throat, and it must have taken the scab off, and he came in a minute and said he wanted to go to bed. And so it was just coming evening, and I put him to bed. I said, you don't want to go to bed now, do you? And he said, yes, and so he got undressed and went to bed. And he didn't tell me anything was wrong. And after he'd been to bed a little while, I heard him just give an awful kind of a sickening scream. And I went in there and kind of raised him up, and he just went blop, and just, I guess a big old cup of blood. He vomited up. He knew his throat was bleeding, and that's why he thought he ought to go to bed. And he just got in there, and he just got so sick, and the doctor had to come and cauterize his throat. I had to have the doctor come and cauterize it before it would stop bleeding. You couldn't hardly get a doctor, but he did come down and cauterize his throat, and then it stopped bleeding, and he settled down, and we was really careful not to let him have anything. I've been really careful watching him, just giving him soft foods all the time, but he got a graham cracker for some reason. He just came in, climbed up and got a graham cracker, and I didn't know it, and I guess the graham cracker was too rough. But anyhow, that was the experience he had. Garry got along pretty good with his. But that took the tonsils for 3 of them, and I guess Lyle was in. I can see how very unorganized this, because I haven't even got Garry Don born yet. Telling all about him having these tonsils out just before he went to school. And Lyle was on the scene then, and I haven't got Garry born or Lyle, so I better tell a little bit about them. But first I was thinking about some of the Christmas things that Gail and Olene did before we left down there. When Gail, his second Christmas, we got him a little hobby horse. And I think he'd seen the kids play cars and push them along the floor and And so he thought it'd be real nice we thought it'd be nice to give him a little hobby horse, and when he wanted to straddle it, he could ride around, and take a hold of the strap and play around the house with this little hobby horse. So we got it for him, put it down where he could get it, and he looked at it a minute and took it and put its nose on the floor and went started pushing it along the floor, a motor in it. And we thought that was kind of cute that he did. And then that same Christmas, I guess, was the year that Herman made tables and chair set. And he decided to make Olene a table and chair set, but he also decided he better make Gail a chair too, so they'd each have a chair and could have play dinners. So he thought, well, so they could tell them apart, he'd paint one green and one red on the chairs. So we gave Olene the little red table and the red chair for Christmas, and Gail a green chair. But Olene, she took fancy to the green chair, and she wouldn't have the red chair. Gail didn't know any different. We had to give her the green chair and the red table, and Gail got the red chair for his little chair. But they quite liked those things, and I think everything I got Olene, I got it way too early for her. I got her a little playhouse with all the different rooms and all the furniture to fit the different rooms, and she wasn't big enough to even play house at all. She didn't know what to do but just kind of scatter them. After she got 3 or 4 years older, why, she would have really enjoyed it. But that was all gone by now. And I think some of the things I got her, I got a little bit too soon for her. But I finally found out that you can't grow them up too fast. You have to let them play with rattles a while longer than to start having them play housekeep in the night. I guess one thing I should tell you is that the little spoon that they all ate with was one that Wanda Nielsen brought to Olene when Olene was little. She was the wife of the man that Herman worked for up on the mountain when we was up on the homestead. He came and wanted Herman to flag. He was a contractor on the road, and he gave Herman a job that summer, and boy, the pay was so much better than the little bit of $1-a-day stuff Dad was paying us that Herman worked both jobs. He was fencing for Dad, and he'd go work on the road and then come home and do some fencing on the property there for Grandpa up on the homestead, and it kind of helped us out quite a little bit with the paying the hospital bill for Gail. And so when Gail was born, or when anyhow Olene was just a little kid learning to start to eat, and they came to see Olene in the hospital. They was from down to Richfield, and that was where Gail was born. They brought Olene the little baby spoon, and of course I don't know whether I gave it to her, whether it's still here somewhere, and then the little baby brush that was given to me in the shower when the night I got married. The girlfriends from up at Bryce had a shower for me. Elba went in with them up at Salt Lake and had it down to Aunt Leon's, and they thought they'd really pull a fast one on me. They gave me baby powder and this cute little baby brush and little rubber pants and 2 or 3 things in a packet. They gave me other gifts too, but then that was one packet done up from all of them. It was a lot of baby stuff that they had for me. And so I kept it, and Olene fell heir to it, and I guess they all got their hair brushed with it, because I see that Jeffrey had it in his hand when I had his baby picture taken, so it must have gone down through the family. But it was quite a soft little baby brush, and we'd brush their hair, but we always called it Olene's little baby brush. I made each one of the kids a nice little new layette before they were married, and they always had before they were born, and did lots of fancy handwork on it. And I always kept the boys in little dresses for quite a long while, dainty little dresses and petticoats, and their little nightgowns was embroidered with lace and everything. And now they don't do things like that at all. They put little boys in overalls when they're about a week old. I don't know how they manage, but they do. They have rubber pants now, and they can let them have those kind of clothes, but we didn't have rubber panties, and we had to dry them real often, and so we had little dresses that you could open up easy at the back, the bottom. Well, I better get Garry born before we go on any further. It was after Herman, I think, had stopped hurting for Dad and was working otherwise, and Dr. Duggins wasn't there anymore. Dr. Bigelow wasn't in Panguitch anymore, and they didn't have a maternity home there. So we made arrangements to go over to Kanab to Dr. Aiken for Garry to be delivered. But Herman was working up to Ruby's, and so he thought that if I was over to Alton, he could come that far and pick me up, and I'd be that much closer to Kanab, and if I happened to take sick real quick, I could get Carl or somebody to get me on down to Kanab, and it'd be a lot quicker than from here to Kanab, because that's quite far. And so I went over to, about the time I was expecting, Garry went over to stay a day or two with Grandpa Roundy and wait from a time, and when I decided it was going to be, we called Herman, and he came and took me to Kanab, he and Grandpa Roundy, and they made so much noise outside the hospital door room that the nurse or somebody told them to be quiet. It was in the middle of the night when we got there. But I guess one of the easiest births I had was Garry. I thought it was going to be a long, hard birth, but he was quite a small baby, about 6 pounds. I guess he was about the smallest baby I had. So I got along fairly normal with him. And it was right in the middle of the summer. It was hot. In fact, I was in the hospital with him over the 4th of July, and that's some of the very hottest time. He was born the 26th of June in 1940. And boy, could he ever nurse. He had the most vigorous nurse you ever did see. But he got thrush in his mouth, and you know, it was kind of bad because it kind of bothered me too. And then after we came home, I had to stay there 10 days, and Mother Pollock had Olene and Gail, taking care of them. And I was sure homesick for them. I was sure glad when that time was up. Herman never did come to see me all that time in between, and then when he came after me, it was just like heaven. And we came over as far as Grandpa Roundy's and visited a while, and then came on over home. I don't know if Herman brought me home. I must have come some other way, because I came that far and stayed for several hours, and then came on over home and didn't have anybody to stay with me that night. So Mother sent May down to stay with me, and she says she can wake up and get the baby's diapers and things, and she can be there. She'll be right there. And you know, she was played hard all day, and she was just so tired that I couldn't wake her up for one thing. And Garry, by that time, I was having difficult with him because he was throwing back his food. He'd just be nursing real hard and fast, and all of a sudden it just gushed right back out. It'd just spray all over me and wet my clothes and wet him, and I'd have to change everything from the skin out. Oh, and that was quite miserable for a while, and I couldn't even wake May up to have her get me some dry things out of the cedar chest. And I was holding the baby, and I'd have to carry him around and when me. I didn't have a bit of help, so it wasn't easy at all. I had Gail, and it'd wake them up every time I'd wake up in the night with Garry. It'd wake the kids up, and they'd fret and cry and want to get up. But when I brought Olene home that day, I said, "Come over and let Grandmama take hold of your sleeve and take hold of your coat sleeve and help you get your jacket off." And she says to me, "I don't have to." And that's the first time she'd ever said anything like that. It just about broke my heart. And I said, oh, I felt so bad. And the kids said that the way she learned it was, someone would say, Olene, do this and do that, and one of the other kids would say, she don't have to, you know. And so she said to me, I don't have to. But she came over, and we finally got things back on keel again. And then Garry, after I did start, the doctor said to give him a little bit of pablum or something, a little weight in his stomach. What he did, he nursed vigorously and get air in his stomach, and then when he got kind of full, that air would just come out and push the food out. He said either that or else the milk was too rich, and to give him a little warm water in a bottle before he nursed. And we tried several things, and something seemed to work, because after few weeks while he took his food real good, and he just got fat and cute, and everybody really made over him. But before I was confined, they gave me a baby shower, and he got some quite nice things in the baby shower. It was our club. We had a sewing club, and we used to go and sew quilt blocks to make a quilt for everybody in the club. And it was quite fun. We just went one afternoon a month, so it didn't progress very fast. But Herman was quite against that. He complained, and he'd leave home whenever I was going to have it to my house, or whenever I wanted to go, he wouldn't tend the kids, and he didn't cooperate with me on that, so I gave that up, like I did most everything else that I ever started. And Grandpa didn't see him for a long while, and when he was, maybe almost, he could stand alone and maybe take a few steps, we decided to go over to Grandpa Roundy's, and it was nearly night when we went over, and we thought we'd stay overnight and maybe a day or something. But we thought Grandpa wouldn't know him. I said on the way over, let's just go put Garry down at the door and then knock and hide and see if Grandpa knows who the baby is. So he'd been separating milk out on the porch, and he went in the house, and Herman took Garry down and stood him up to the door and then knocked. And Daddy came back and opened the door, and he said, "Well, here's somebody here on the step. Let's see who you are." And he looked at it quite a while, looked at him and got him in by the light. Got where he could see him in the light. He opened the door enough that he could see his face and everything. He had, guess it'd been a year since he'd seen him, just a little tiny baby, and here he was walking. And he said, "Well," he said, "you must be Zora Bell's baby." I guess he just knew it some way. We didn't think he'd know where that baby, we thought he'd think maybe he had a foundling, but he seemed to know. He said, "I guess you must be Zora Bell's baby." So then we came laughing out and had a good visit, and he thought Garry was cute. And we did too. We thought he was real cute. And Nell Meekum, she just made over him. She says, if ever there was an angel of a baby, it's that Garry Don. She says, I just love that name, and I just love that kid. She said, if I ever have another child, I'm going to name it Garry Don. But when she did, she wasn't in the same town I was, and she did name her baby Garry Don. And when I said something about her saying it, she said she never did say it, so she denied it afterwards, but she said it. But when I'd take him to club with us, when I'd take him as a little baby to club, the women would almost fight over him. Fern Scow, she said, "Oh, let me have him, he's mine, he's mine." She claimed him, and they just love him and kiss him, and he just seemed to like it. And he was a real cuddly baby. Gail was one of these that didn't want you to hold him down and cuddle him too much, but Garry was real cuddly. He'd cuddle right to you, and he liked it, and he grew up kind of cuddly. You know, he'd make over Aunt Irma and call her Mur, and he'd give her loves and everything like that when she was living with us up to Ogden. Well, he just kind of lived along with the other kids. We had our meals, and we had little finger plays, and we walked up to the mail, and we went to Sunday school and primary, and, you know, just did the little things that kids do, and lived there every day kind of alone. And Herman was away working all the time. Once in a while he came home, but not very often. And then when we went up to Ogden, why, Garry was only about a year old. Let's see, he would have been 2 in June, I guess, and we went up in right about that time. And he was cute then. He'd get Herman's big old hat on and these boots, his work shoes, and the lunch bucket after Herman had come home from work, and he'd try to climb the steps up out of the basement, and we'd say, "Where are you going, Garry Don?" He'd say, Go work." He had a little low voice, and he said, Go work. And it was cute. Herman still remembers him doing that. And then he had these high tension nerves. I had quite a problem with him because he had a strep throat when he was about 18 months old, and I think he got rheumatic fever at the same time. and some heart damage, enlarged heart and trouble, and we weren't aware of that. But anytime anybody, like I was saying on the other tape, that Garry had an enlarged heart and high tension nerves, we found out, and that every time he had an injury he would pass out and like hold his breath and just go unconscious for a little while. Then when he'd relax, after he'd catch his breath and kind of relax and go into kind of a coma for a little bit, he would relax all over and he'd gently wet his panties. And the first time I ever knew there was any problem this way or that he had anything wrong with his heart and it was after he'd had this rheumatic fever that I spoke of and the strep throat. He was sitting on the floor playing quite close to the door, and Devon just came bursting through the door, just banged it open and just went running right through the living room and out the kitchen door. And he tipped Garry right over, ran right over Garry. And Garry started to cry, and he never ever caught his breath. He just gave out one cry, and he didn't even suck his breath back in. He just went, after he kind of held his breath and went blue, he just kind of straightened out and went, kind of moaned, and then he just went white. He just stiffened out, and I thought it had broke his spinal cord. Column, in his back or done something, injured him. He acted so funny, and then he just kind of laid still all day, and I just looked for him to die or anything wrong. I didn't know what had happened to him. I knew Devon just tramped right over him. Just came banging through the door and hit him with the door and got right on, just run right over him. And Devon was about 6 or 7 years old then, maybe 8. Anyway, it really scared me, and after we got back up to Ogden, he was coming on 2. Well, he was 2 at the time, and anytime he got his finger bumped a little bit or got it pinched in the door or somebody stepped on his toe, it was any kind of a shock on his nervous system. It wasn't that you scolded him or anything and he got mad. Well, Nida said when she saw him do it a time or two, she says it's nothing but temper tantrum. She said it just makes him mad if he gets hurt, and he just does this. He just cries and holds his breath. She said if it's my kid, he'd get a right hard beating. Says I just whip him right good and bring him out of him. Said that'd cure him. Well, Herman heard her say that, and he just thought that was what was so. But I talked to the doctor. I asked him about it. I told him what he did, and he said he needs attention. He said, I'm going to send you to a specialist. And I said, I know he isn't a temperamental kid. He doesn't get mad and throw tantrums. I said, it's always when he gets hurt. And so a specialist told me, he said, he's got an enlarged heart and high tension nerves. And he had me quite scared. I didn't hardly dare to start him into school. I was afraid maybe he wasn't well enough. And when I took him to a doctor up there to send him, he said, well, I would just let him do what he wants to, but whoever's trying to scare you clear to death about him, well, I wouldn't, he'll probably grow out of this. But he would roll back and forth with his head, and he rubbed all of his hair off. Well, Dad Pollock called it his monkey patches. Garry had quite a bit of thick and fairly dark hair, a dark brown hair, but he'd lay on the floor and just roll his head back and forth, a lot, and he'd roll himself to sleep that way. He's just a nervous type baby after this happened to him, and that was after he's about 18 or 20 months old, until he was, maybe first grade or nearly ready for kindergarten. And I just really kind of pampered him, and I tried to watch that he didn't ever get hurt. But Herman, he still couldn't. And the doctor said, whatever you do, treat him real calm. He said, and don't let him know that this upsets you. I said, it scares me nearly to death, but his dad just thinks he's having a temper tantrum. In fact, Herman spanked him a few times, and it just made me cry. I told him, if you do that again, I'll just do something mean to you. I just and he said, well, he's just having a temper tantrum like Nida says, and he needs to, you know. But he didn't. He'd just give out one cry and pass out. And the doctor said you could shock his nerves worse. He said just treat him real calm and just hold him gentle. And he said he'll come out of it. He'll catch his breath, and then after a while he'll relax. And then he said it was just natural for him when they kind of relaxed and hadn't still gained back their consciousness. They'd held their breath and hadn't got oxygen to their brain, and they still didn't know exactly what they're doing. He said if he needs to go to the bathroom at all, why, he'll probably relax and wet his panties. And so I'd have to change him each time nearly, and I'd hold him for a while, and he'd generally go to sleep afterwards. But I worried a lot about him because of that. But he had a pretty good childhood up there to Ogden for a few years till he was ready to start kindergarten, and he did start kindergarten for a little while, and then we moved down here on the 4th of July, just before the 4th. But while Irma was living with us during the service, well, he used to get up on the couch about the time he knew Irma was coming. He'd just watch down the window, and then he'd squeal, here come Mer, here come Mer. That was when he was only about 2.5 or 3. He called her Mer for Irma. He couldn't say Irma, and he'd say Mer. But he was a good-natured, happy child, ordinarily, and free-hearted. He would just give anything he had away. And then I think that's right when he may have started getting diabetes, because he would just shake and get so nervous any time anybody'd give him some candy. You know, if he saw you had a sack of candy before you could even get it open and give him some, he'd just be trembly for some. You know, he just would be so nervous that he couldn't hardly wait for it. And sometimes when he'd have money of his own, when he got a little older, he'd buy candy and he'd eat every bit of it his own self. And then he'd go sound asleep, and I guess it was the diabetes, you know. He'd just eat too much sugar and go maybe partway into a coma at times. I don't know. But I'm just sure he must have had diabetes from the time he was just a little child. And I kind of pampered him. I didn't try to make him do the hard things that, when there was a chore to be done out in the snow and the cold, I generally put it on to Gail, and as Lyle grew up a little more, I shifted over to Gail and Lyle together and kind of let Garry just do the things doctor said, just let him do what he feels like doing. Don't force him. And he said when he's tired, let him rest, and just let him do what he feels like doing. If he's too tired and don't want to go to school, don't make him go that day. But I didn't. He always went to school. He wanted to go to school, and he wanted to go to primary and Sunday school and everything. But I didn't hold him right hard to his lessons and try to make sure that he got his lessons. I don't think quite as exacting as I did some of the kids. I let him get by a little easier, and I don't think it came quite as easy for him. I think he had this little health problem. But the things that he did do, he did real thorough in his arithmetic and things. It was just real neat and thorough and little fine writing. And that was the way he went through school. And he started up there, and then we moved down here. And he was playing, it was during the summer, and he's playing during the summer, and he was up in the barn with the kids, and he fell out the barn window. And he hurt him quite bad. I guess it was quite a hard fall, and he went into one of these shocked things. Uncle Otto and Aunt Rita was there, and Herman. We were there to Mother Pollock's and Dad Pollock's. It was before we got our own place to come, just after we came down from Ogden. The kids was playing with him. They took him up in the barn. He was about 5. And he fell out backwards out of the window and lit on the hard ground. And we thought he was going to die that whole afternoon. They administered to him and everything. He just went into one shock after another, and he was quite sick that time. But I think the blessing they gave him really helped, and I feel like the Lord intervened in his behalf at that time. I don't know whether I told you how he cut his teeth. It was when he was quite young. He cut his teeth, I guess, the youngest of any of the children. I was up quilting to Mother's before we ever went to Ogden. I think he was about 7 months old, and little Maggie was holding. She didn't quilt, and neither did Nida, but they used to come and sit and visit while we did. And she says, "Has the baby got any teeth?" When he fretted, she says, "I'll tend him. I'll take him up, you know." And she went and got him. She says, "He got any teeth yet?" And I said, "No, he hasn't got any yet." And she was letting him bite on her fingers and everything. I didn't usually let him bite on my hands, you know, chew on them and suck on them, but she put her fingers there. She says, "I'll bet I can feel some teeth in there." And says, "I'm going to see." And she took him in and got a spoon out of Mother's cupboard drawer, and she kind of put it in his mouth, and it clinked. And we looked, and he had some teeth coming through, and we was there a day or two and went over to Elva's. And while he was over there, I said, "He's got a tooth or two coming through. Did you know? Already." I said, "The other kids didn't get theirs till he's over a year old." But I said, "Garry Don's got a tooth." And she said, "Let's see." And we looked, and he had 7 teeth all through already. And I didn't even know he had them. And the other kids would get real sick. They'd get sick to their stomach, and they'd get feverish, and then they'd get a tooth. The doctor says that's when they started to move in the gums, sometimes a while before the tooth come through, when it started to move. But Garry Don has got his teeth easy, and that was the way it was with all of his teeth. He just didn't have a very hard time. Well, when he started the first grade down here, started to learn to read, he had a teacher, it was real funny. She had what she called her smart group and her dumb group. And she put Garry in the smart group, but she put some of the others in the dumb group. But she had him read just right. And the way he'd read, instead of saying "the boy went in the barn" or anything, he'd say, "The boy went in the barn." You know, just holler every word out separate. Well, Herman wouldn't listen to him try to read at home. He'd say, "Oh, shut that kid up. He's making me so nervous, can't stand it." Herman was kind of worrying. He's kind of out of work at times, and he was there in the evening, and Garry I didn't make Garry do his work after school. I figured he needed to be free and pray a little bit and relax, and so when he'd come in the evening, before he went to bed, I'd have him try to read a little while I was doing up the supper work.